The parking lot at NBC Studios in Burbank was never truly silent. Even at 3 in the morning, you could hear the distant hum of refrigeration units, the occasional security guard's footsteps echoing off concrete, the soft buzz of sodium vapor lights cutting through California darkness. But on this particular October night in 1976, Johnny Carson heard something else as he walked toward his car, the sound of a lighter clicking repeatedly, failing to catch flame. He almost didn't look. After 30 years in show business, you learned when to see things and when to let them pass by unseen. The interview had been difficult. Frank Sinatra had arrived in a mood, defensive and sharp-edged, turning simple questions into confrontations. The audience had laughed nervously through most of it, unsure whether they were watching entertainment or witnessing something private that shouldn't be televised. Johnny had ended the segment early, something he rarely did, and Frank had left the stage without the usual backstage pleasantries. That should have been the end of it. But there, 3 rows deep in the visitor parking area, sat a midnight blue Cadillac with its interior light on. And inside, Frank Sinatra was trying to light a cigarette with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Johnny stopped walking. Every instinct told him to keep moving, to let whatever this was remain Frank's business. They weren't friends. They were professional acquaintances who'd shared a stage maybe a dozen times over 2 decades. Frank had his people, his inner circle, his confidants. Johnny wasn't one of them. The lighter clicked again, failed again. Johnny changed direction. As he approached the Cadillac, he could see Frank more clearly through the windshield. The man who'd just been on stage, all controlled aggression and coiled energy, looked somehow smaller now. His tie was loosened, his jacket tossed in the passenger seat, his shirt collar dark with sweat despite the cool October air. He was staring straight ahead at nothing, the unlit cigarette hanging from his lips, his hands trembling as he tried once more to make the lighter work. Johnny tapped on the window. Frank's head snapped toward him, and for a moment, Johnny saw something he'd never seen in those famous blue eyes, genuine fear. Not the manufactured vulnerability of a ballad, not the calculated emotion of a performance, but real, animal fear. Then Frank blinked, and it was gone, replaced by that familiar Sinatra mask of casual indifference. Frank rolled down the window manually, the old-style crank squeaking in the quiet. "Forget something, John." Frank's voice was rough, like he'd been shouting, though Johnny knew he hadn't been. "You're still here," Johnny said. "It wasn't a question. Looks that way. It's been 2 hours." Frank glanced at the dashboard clock, seeming genuinely surprised. "Huh, time flies when you're having fun." He tried to smile. It didn't work. Johnny should have walked away then, should have offered some polite exit line, something about getting home, about the late hour. Instead, he heard himself say, "I can't go back there, can I? That's what you're thinking. I can't go back there." Frank's hand, still holding the lighter, stopped moving. The cigarette dropped from his lips into his lap. He didn't pick it up. "She's afraid of me now," Frank said quietly. "Barbara. I saw it in her eyes this morning. That little flinch, like I'm something that might bite." Johnny didn't ask permission. He walked around to the passenger side, moved the jacket, and got in. The Cadillac smelled like expensive cologne, cigarette smoke, and something else. Desperation, maybe? Though Johnny didn't know if desperation had a smell or if he was just projecting. They sat in silence for a long moment. Johnny had interviewed thousands of people, had mastered the art of the perfectly timed question, the gentle probe, the knowing when to push and when to let silence do the work. But this wasn't an interview. This was something else entirely. "You want to tell me what happened?" Johnny finally asked. "Which time?" Frank's laugh was bitter. "This morning? Last week? Last month? Pick a fucking time, John. I've got a whole highlight reel." "Start with this morning." Frank leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closed. "We were having breakfast, normal breakfast. She was reading the paper, I was reading the trades. The coffee pot was between us. She reached for it the same time I did, and our hands touched. Just touched. Nothing dramatic. And I don't even know what happened. It was like something snapped. I grabbed her wrist, hard. I saw her face change, saw her try not to look scared, and that made it worse somehow. I squeezed harder. I wanted her to be scared. I wanted her to know I could hurt her if I wanted to." Johnny kept his voice neutral. "Did you hurt her?" I let go. Eventually, I let go and I walked out of the house and I got in this car and I drove around for 6 hours before the show. I couldn't tell you where I went. I just drove. Frank opened his eyes, turned to look at Johnny directly. You know the worst part? When I grabbed her, when I saw that fear, there was this moment, just a split second, where it felt good, where the power felt good, and that's when I knew I'm turning into him. Your father. Marty Sinatra, the meanest son of a bitch in Hoboken, could make you feel 2 inches tall without even raising his voice. But when he did raise his voice, when he used his hands, Frank's jaw tightened. I spent my whole life swearing I'd never be him. And here I am, 60 years old, grabbing my wife at the breakfast table like some kind of animal. Johnny had done his homework over the years. He knew about Marty Sinatra, the former boxer turned bar owner, the immigrant father who'd ruled his household with fists and fury. He knew Frank rarely spoke about him, had skipped his funeral in 1969, had once told a reporter that the best thing his father ever did was die before Frank became famous enough to have to invite him to things. Is this the first time? Johnny asked. With Barbara? Frank was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was different, smaller, younger somehow. She's the third wife, John. You think she's the first one who got scared? Ava. He stopped, started again. Ava used to say I had two personalities, Frank and the Sicilian. Frank was the guy who sang love songs and cried at movies. The Sicilian was the guy who threw furniture through windows and punched photographers and made people disappear from his life for looking at him wrong. Which one am I talking to now? I don't know anymore. That's the problem. They're starting to blur together. Frank reached down, picked up the fallen cigarette, looked at it like he'd forgotten what it was for. I broke Ava's favorite vase once, not accidentally. I picked it up and threw it against the wall because she'd said something I didn't like. Can't even remember what it was now. Something about my friends, probably. She was always right about my friends. And I watched it shatter, this thing she loved, this thing her grandmother had given her, and I felt satisfied, like I'd won something. Did you apologize? Frank laughed, a sound with no humor in it. I bought her a diamond bracelet. That's what guys like me do, right? We break things and then we buy things. We make grand gestures instead of actual amends. The bracelet cost more than most people make in a year. She wore it twice and then left it in a drawer. We were divorced 18 months later. And Nancy? Johnny asked, meaning Frank's first wife, the mother of his children. Nancy never fought back. That was worse in some ways. Ava would throw things back at me, would scream, would give as good as she got. But Nancy would just take it, would go quiet, would wait for the storm to pass, and I'd see her doing that, see her making herself small, and it would make me angrier. Like she was judging me by not judging me, you know? Johnny did know. He'd never hit his wives, but he'd been cruel in other ways. The cold silences, the calculated withdrawals of affection, the affairs conducted with just enough discretion that they could be denied but never enough that they weren't obvious. He'd made Joanne cry more times than he could count, and he'd never once raised his voice to do it. Why are you telling me this? Johnny asked. Frank turned to look at him, really look at him, and Johnny saw that fear again in his eyes. Because I'm sitting in a parking lot at 3 a.m, too afraid to go home to my wife. Because I did an interview with you tonight where I was a complete asshole for no reason except that you asked me about my music, and for some reason that felt like an attack. Because I'm 60 years old and I still don't know how to be alone in a room with my own thoughts for more than 5 minutes. Because everyone who knows me is afraid of me, and everyone who isn't afraid of me doesn't actually know me. I'm not afraid of you, Johnny said. You should be. But Frank said it without conviction, like he was reading from a script he no longer believed in. They sat in silence again. Through the windshield, Johnny could see the outline of the NBC building, could see the window of his office on the 6th floor. He'd been working there for 14 years. The Tonight Show had become the most successful program in late-night television history. He'd interviewed presidents and movie stars and astronauts and musicians. He'd made America laugh through assassinations and wars and scandals and social upheaval. And he'd done it all while keeping a careful distance between Johnny Carson the performer and Johnny Carson the person, because he'd learned early that the person wasn't nearly as likable as the performance. My father used to beat me with a belt, Johnny heard himself say. He never talked about this. Not with friends, not with wives, not with therapists. Certainly not with Frank Sinatra in a parking lot at 3 in the morning. Not spanking, beating. He'd make me count the licks. If I lost count, he'd start over. And the whole time, he'd be calm, completely calm, like he was doing a chore, taking out the trash, beating his son. Same emotional investment in both. Frank didn't say anything. He'd gone very still. I wet the bed until I was 11, Johnny continued. Every time it happened, he'd make me wash the sheets in the bathtub while he watched. Cold water, because we couldn't waste hot water on my weakness. And he'd stand there and tell me about all the ways I was a disappointment, all the ways I'd never amount to anything, all the ways I was exactly like his father, who was apparently the worst man who ever lived, though he never explained why. Did you ever fight back? Frank asked quietly. Once. I was 15. He came at me with the belt and I grabbed it, just grabbed it out of his hand. I was bigger than him by then, stronger. I could see in his eyes that he knew it, and I wanted to hit him so badly, Frank. I wanted to beat him the way he'd beaten me. I wanted to make him count. I wanted to see him cry and beg and lose control of his bladder from fear. What did you do? I let go of the belt. I walked out of the house, and I never let him hit me again. But I also never hit him. And I've spent my whole life wondering if that makes me better than him or just weaker. Frank was looking at him with an expression Johnny couldn't quite read. You think that's what I'm asking? How to be weaker? I think you're asking how to stop passing it on. The rage, the fear, the need to make other people smaller so you can feel bigger. And you figured it out? Johnny laughed, a real laugh this time, though it was edged with sadness. I figured out how to hide it better. I figured out how to hurt people with words instead of fists, with absence instead of presence. I figured out how to make a performance so good that nobody looks behind it to see what it's covering up. Is that better? I genuinely don't know, Frank. I've been married 3 times. My kids barely know me. I drink too much when I'm alone, which is most of the time. I've made millions of people laugh, and I can't remember the last time I felt genuine joy. So we're both fucked, Frank said. Probably. But maybe there's fucked, and then there's fucked. Maybe there's a difference between sitting in this parking lot knowing there's a problem and sitting in this parking lot pretending there isn't one. Frank picked up the lighter again, and this time his hands were steadier. He lit the cigarette, took a long drag, exhaled slowly. I called my mother last week, he said. Dolly, she's 81 now, still sharp as a tack, still running her life, and everyone else is like she's the goddamn mayor of Hoboken. I asked her about my old man, asked her why she stayed with him. All those years of him coming home drunk, knocking her around, terrorizing the neighborhood. Why didn't she leave? What did she say? She said, because he was my husband and you don't leave your husband. Just like that, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. And then she said, he wasn't always like that. Some days he was gentle. Some days he'd bring me flowers and tell me I was the most beautiful woman in New Jersey. You think I'm going to throw away the good days because of the bad ones? Jesus, Johnny muttered. I asked her if she was afraid of him. She got quiet for a minute. And then she said, every day of my life, but I was more afraid of being alone. And then she asked me why I was asking, and I couldn't tell her. I couldn't tell my own mother that I'm turning into the man who terrorized her for 40 years. Are you? Johnny asked. Turning into him? Frank smoked in silence for a moment. I don't know. I know I've got his temper. I know I've got his need to control everything and everyone. I know I've got his inability to apologize, to admit when I'm wrong, to back down from a fight even when backing down is the smart thing to do. But I also know I've never hit a woman. I've thrown things, I've yelled, I've been cruel in 1,000 different ways, but I've never used my fists. Not on a woman. Is that enough? Is that the line that makes me different? I don't think there's a simple answer to that. That's not helpful, John. I know, but I think the fact that you're asking the question matters. I think the fact that you're sitting in this parking lot instead of going home and pretending everything's fine matters. I think the fact that you're scared of what you might become means you're not all the way there yet. Frank stubbed out the cigarette in the ashtray. Barbara wants me to see someone. A shrink. She's been suggesting it for months, but tonight she didn't suggest. She demanded. She said if I don't get help, she's leaving. Not as a threat, as a fact. And the worst part is, I don't blame her. If I was married to me, I'd leave too. Are you going to go? To the shrink? I don't know. The idea of sitting in some office telling some stranger about my feelings makes me want to. He paused. See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. The idea of being vulnerable makes me want to punch something. What kind of man is like that? The kind who learned early that vulnerability gets you hurt, Johnny said. The kind who built armor so thick they forgot what it was protecting. When did you get so fucking wise? I'm not wise. I'm just practiced at sounding like I am. That's the job, isn't it? Make it look easy. Make it look natural. Make it look like you've got all the answers when really you're just as lost as everyone else. Frank pulled another cigarette from the pack, but didn't light it. Just held it between his fingers, rolling it back and forth. You know what scares me most? It's not that I'll hurt Barbara. I mean, that scares me too, obviously. But the thing that keeps me up at night is this. What if I can't change? What if this is just who I am? What if I'm 60 years old and this is it? This is the finished product, and there's nothing to do now but ride it out until I die. Do you believe that? Some days, yeah, some days I believe that exactly. Johnny thought about his own life, his own patterns, his own failures repeated across 3 marriages and countless relationships. He thought about the way he kept people at arm's length, the way he performed intimacy instead of feeling it, the way he'd built a career on being liked by millions while being truly known by no one. I think people can change, Johnny said slowly. But I also think change is harder than we want to believe. I think it requires admitting things about yourself that are painful to admit. I think it requires asking for help, which for guys like us might be the hardest thing in the world. And I think it requires being patient with yourself when you fuck up, which you will, because changing patterns that have been there your whole life doesn't happen overnight. That's not very encouraging. No, but it's honest. Frank finally lit the second cigarette. I keep having this dream. I'm on stage, but I can't remember any of the lyrics. I open my mouth and nothing comes out. And the audience is just sitting there, silent, waiting. And I can feel them starting to turn on me, starting to realize I'm a fraud. And then I look down and my hands are covered in blood. Not my blood, someone else's. And I can't remember whose or why, but I know it's my fault. And then I wake up and I'm sweating through the sheets and Barbara's looking at me like I'm a stranger. How often do you have this dream? 3, 4 times a week, more lately. Johnny didn't say that he had similar dreams, different details, but the same core fear. Being exposed, being revealed as insufficient, being abandoned when people saw the truth. He didn't say that he woke up in cold sweats too, that he sometimes drank himself back to sleep rather than lying there with his thoughts. What are you going to tell Barbara when you get home? Johnny asked. I don't know. That I'm sorry, that I'm scared, that I don't know how to be the man she deserves, but I'm willing to try. That's a start. Is it enough? I don't know, Frank, but it's more honest than showing up with another bracelet. Frank smiled just a little. You're kind of an asshole, you know that? Takes one to know one. They sat for a few more minutes in comfortable silence. The sky to the east was starting to lighten, that deep purple that comes before dawn. Soon the day shift would start arriving, security guards changing over, early production assistants coming in to prep for morning shows. This strange interlude, this unexpected intimacy, would end. They'd go back to being Johnny Carson and Frank Sinatra, public figures maintaining public personas, professional acquaintances who shared a stage occasionally, and nothing more. But not yet. For now, they were just 2 men in a car, 2 sons of violent fathers, 2 performers who'd learned to hide themselves so well, they'd almost forgotten there was anything underneath to hide. I'm going to make an appointment, Frank said suddenly. With the shrink. I'm going to do it tomorrow. Today, I guess, technically. Good. And I'm going to tell Barbara what happened, not make excuses, not minimize it. Just tell her the truth and let her decide what she wants to do with that information. That's brave. No, it's not. It's terrifying. But I think maybe that's the point. The things worth doing are the things that scare you. Did you just quote a fortune cookie? Fuck you, John. But Frank was smiling now, a real smile, and some of the tension had left his shoulders. Johnny opened the passenger door, stepped out into the cool morning air. You gonna be okay to drive? Yeah, I'm good. Frank started the engine. Hey, John? Yeah? Thanks for not walking past. Thanks for not driving away when you saw me coming. Frank nodded, put the car in reverse, then stopped. One more thing. That interview tonight. I was an asshole. You were. I'll make it up to you next time. Come back when I'm in a better headspace. Do it right. I'd like that. And John, what you said about your father, about the belt, about all of it, that stays here, right? That's not going in your monologue tomorrow night. That stays here. Johnny confirmed. That's not material. That's just life. Life, Frank repeated. Yeah, life's a bitch, isn't it? And then you die. Jesus, you're dark when you're not performing. You have no idea. Frank pulled out of the parking space, then stopped one more time, window down. I mean it, though. Thank you. I was about to do something stupid tonight. I don't know what exactly, but something. And I didn't, because you stopped. We all need someone to stop for us sometimes, Johnny said. Frank drove away, taillights disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. Johnny stood there for a moment, watching him go, then walked to his own car. He had a show to do in 15 hours. He had a performance to deliver. He had a mask to put on. But for now, in the quiet moment between night and day, he let himself just be Johnny Carson the person. Tired, lonely, damaged, trying. The story of what happened in that parking lot never made it into the tabloids. Frank Sinatra started therapy 3 days later, though he never spoke about it publicly. He and Barbara stayed married until his death in 1998, and those who knew them both said the marriage changed after 1976, became softer somehow, more honest. Johnny Carson never mentioned the incident, not in interviews, not in his memoirs, not in private conversations with friends. It was locked away in that place where he kept all the real things, all the true things, all the things that mattered too much to be turned into material. But those who worked closely with Johnny on The Tonight Show noticed a change after that night. He was still professional, still brilliant, still the best in the business. But occasionally, very occasionally, when a guest started to crumble on camera, when someone's mask slipped and real vulnerability showed through, Johnny would do something different. He wouldn't go for the joke. He wouldn't smooth it over. He'd just sit there, present, and let the moment be what it was. And Frank Sinatra, in the last 22 years of his life, had a reputation for unexpected gentleness with young performers, particularly male singers who seemed to carry darkness behind their eyes. He'd pull them aside after shows, buy them coffee, ask them hard questions about how they were really doing. More than one of them later said that Frank Sinatra saved their life, though none of them could quite explain how or why. The two men appeared on The Tonight Show together only twice more, once in 1982 and once in 1992, just before Johnny retired. Both interviews were warm, funny, professional. They never mentioned that night in 1976. They never referenced what had passed between them in that parking lot. But at the end of that final interview in 1992, as Frank was leaving the stage, he paused, turned back, and said something to Johnny that the microphones didn't quite catch. Johnny laughed, really laughed, not the professional laugh, but the real one. And then he said something back, equally inaudible. Years later, a production assistant who'd been standing nearby was asked what they'd said to each other. I couldn't hear it all, she reported, but I caught the last few words. Frank said something about parking lots, and Johnny said something about showing up. And then Frank said, clear as day, you showed up, John. When it mattered, you showed up. That parking lot at NBC Studios is gone now, paved over and rebuilt a dozen times. The cars that sat there that night have long since been crushed and recycled. The men who sat in them have both passed away, taking their secrets and their struggles with them. But the truth they shared that night, the truth about fear and rage, and the desperate hope that we might become something better than what made us, that truth remains. It lives in every person who stops walking when they hear someone struggling in the dark. It lives in every moment of unexpected vulnerability between unlikely allies. It lives in the simple revolutionary act of one broken person seeing another broken person and saying, "Me too. I'm scared too. Let's figure this out together." That's the real legacy of that night. Not what was said, not what was solved, but what was witnessed, what was acknowledged, what was shared. Two men in a parking lot at 3 in the morning, two sons of violent fathers, two performers who'd built empires on their ability to hide, choosing for once to be seen.